It was a crisp autumn morning in London, and the air carried that perfect mix of chill and sunshine. The kind of day where you could see your breath but still feel warm enough to enjoy being outside. Whoopi Goldberg, the legendary comedian, actress, and co-host of The View, had landed in the UK for one of her signature whirlwind adventures. This time, though, she wasn't here for a movie premiere or a late-night talk show appearance. No, this trip was different. She was going to meet some of Britain's most iconic figures, the Royal Guards. Now, if you've ever seen pictures or videos of these guards, you know they're not exactly known for cracking jokes. Standing tall in their bright red tunics and bearskin hats, they look like living statues. Their job is to guard Buckingham Palace and other royal landmarks, and they do it with such precision and seriousness that tourists often try to get them to smile just for fun. But no matter how much people wave, shout, or pull silly faces, the guards rarely react. It's almost like they're robots programmed to stand perfectly still. Whoopi, of course, couldn't resist the challenge. She'd always been someone who thrived on breaking down walls and finding common ground with people from all walks of life. Whether she was chatting with world leaders or random strangers on the street, she had a way of making everyone feel at ease. And today she decided those stoic guards were going to be her latest project. As she stepped out of the car near Buckingham Palace, the first thing she noticed was the crowd gathered around the gates. Tourists were snapping photos, pointing excitedly and trying every trick in the book to get the guards to crack even the tiniest smirk. Some held up funny signs, others danced wildly, and a few kids even mimicked the guards' stiff poses. But nothing worked. The soldiers stood as still as ever, their expressions unreadable. Whoopi chuckled to herself as she approached. "Well, well, well," she said, glancing at the two guards stationed nearby. "Looks like we've got ourselves a couple of human mannequins over here." Her voice carried just enough volume to catch the attention of both the guards and the curious onlookers around her. She leaned in closer, pretending to inspect one of the guards like he was part of an art exhibit. "Wow, look at that shine on those boots," she exclaimed dramatically. "I bet you spend more time polishing these things than I do brushing my teeth." A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd, and a few people pulled out their phones to record the moment. But Whoopi wasn't done yet. With her trademark wit, she started playfully imitating the guard's rigid posture. She straightened her back, puffed out her chest, and stared straight ahead with mock seriousness. Then, without missing a beat, she saluted, except instead of keeping it sharp and proper, she added a little flair by wiggling her fingers before bringing her hand down. The crowd erupted into giggles, and even the production crew filming the scene struggled to keep a straight face. Despite all the antics, the guards didn't budge. Not a twitch, not a blink, not even a flicker of acknowledgement. They might as well have been carved out of stone. Whoopi tilted her head, studying them closely. "You guys are good?" she admitted, grinning. "Seriously, I've seen less movement from actual statues." Her playful teasing continued, each joke landing perfectly with the audience. At one point, she joked about how the guards probably spent so much time standing still that they forgot how to walk. Another time, she pretended to whisper a secret into one guard's ear, only to burst out laughing when he remained completely unfazed. Every line, every gesture brought fresh waves of laughter from the growing crowd. What made the scene truly special, though, was how natural Whoopi seemed. There was no arrogance or mockery in her tone, just pure curiosity mixed with humor. She treated the guards like people, not props, even as she teased them relentlessly. And while the guards stayed silent, something interesting began to happen. As the minutes ticked by, the atmosphere shifted slightly. People stopped seeing the guards as distant, untouchable figures and started viewing them as real humans caught in the middle of a very public performance. For Whoopi, this was familiar territory. Throughout her career, she'd used laughter as a tool to connect with people, to break barriers and find shared humanity. That's why she loved moments like this. They reminded her that humor could be a bridge, not a weapon. Still, there was something about these guards that intrigued her. Sure, they weren't reacting to her jokes, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to them than met the eye. Little did she know, her playful encounter was about to take a turn she hadn't expected. Beneath the polished surface of discipline and tradition lay stories waiting to be told. and one of those stories would soon leave an indelible mark on her. Whoopi's playful banter with the royal guards had reached its peak, and the crowd around her was thoroughly entertained. The laughter was infectious, spreading like wildfire as more tourists stopped to watch the scene unfold. Whoopi wasn't just cracking jokes for herself. She was putting on a show, turning what could have been an ordinary tourist moment into a full-blown performance. She leaned in closer to one of the guards, pretending to scrutinize his face with exaggerated curiosity. "You know," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I think I've seen more expression on a mannequin at Macy's." The crowd burst into laughter again, and someone even clapped enthusiastically. Whoopi grinned, clearly enjoying herself. But deep down, there was a part of her that wondered, could I actually get them to crack? With renewed determination, she tried a different approach. Instead of focusing solely on their stoic expressions, she started asking questions. Silly ones, of course, but questions nonetheless. "Hey, do you guys ever get bored standing here like this?" she asked, tilting her head. "Like, do you daydream about dinner or secretly hum songs in your head?" No response, not even a blink. The guards stood firm, their faces as unreadable as ever. Undeterred, Whoopi decided to step up her game. She turned to the audience, gesturing dramatically toward the guards. "Okay, folks, I need your help," she announced. "Let's see if we can team up and break these two. If we all try together, maybe, just maybe, we'll get a smile." The crowd loved the idea. People began cheering, waving their hands, and shouting greetings. A group of kids started jumping up and down, trying to catch the guards' attention. Someone held up a sign that read, "Smile, please," while another person broke into an impromptu dance routine right in front of the guards. It was chaos, but the kind of joyful, light-hearted chaos that made everyone feel connected. Whoopi joined in too, pulling out all the stops. She mimicked the guards' rigid stance again, this time exaggerating it to the point of absurdity. Then, she added a theatrical salute, complete with a flourish of her imaginary hat. When that didn't work, she switched tactics and started telling stories. "Once upon a time," she began, addressing the guards as though they were old friends, "there was a guard who got so tired of standing still that he invented a new dance move. It was called the Royal Shuffle. Have you heard of it?" Still nothing. The guards remained statuesque, refusing to give in. Whoopi shook her head in mock frustration. "Wow, you guys are pros," she admitted, clapping her hands lightly. "I mean, I've met rocks less stubborn than you two." Her words drew another round of laughter from the crowd, and the energy stayed high. But as much fun as everyone was having, Whoopi couldn't ignore the fact that the guards weren't reacting, not even a little bit. At first, she thought it was impressive. After all, how many people could resist such relentless charm? But as the minutes passed, a tiny seed of doubt planted itself in her mind. Was she crossing a line? Was her humor coming across as disrespectful instead of playful? She glanced around at the crowd, taking in their smiling faces and enthusiastic cheers. They seemed to be loving every second of it, but Whoopi knew better than anyone that appearances could be deceiving. Comedy was her superpower, but it wasn't foolproof. Sometimes, even the best intentions could land wrong, especially when dealing with traditions and cultures outside her own experience. Still, she pushed forward, determined to keep things light. She cracked one last joke before wrapping up her impromptu act. All right, she said, holding up her hands in surrender. "I give up. You win. You're officially the toughest audience I've ever had." The crowd applauded, clearly satisfied with the entertainment. Cameras flashed as tourists captured the moment, eager to share it with friends and family back home. As the excitement began to wind down, Whoopi thanked the guards with genuine warmth. "Thanks for being such good sports," she said, giving them a small nod. Whether or not they acknowledged her gratitude, she couldn't tell, but she hoped they understood that her jokes came from a place of admiration, not mockery. Later that evening, during a live segment on The View, Whoopi recounted the entire encounter. Clips of her antics played on the big screen behind her, and the studio audience roared with laughter. She described the guards' unshakable composure, the crowd's enthusiasm and her own attempts to break through their disciplined facade. It was classic Whoopi, funny, relatable, and utterly endearing. But then, something unexpected happened. Just as she was finishing her story, a producer handed her a folded piece of paper. Whoopi unfolded it, her eyebrows lifting in surprise. It was a note from one of the guards. The room grew quiet as Whoopi read the message aloud. Her voice softened, losing its usual comedic edge. "It says," she began, pausing briefly to collect herself. "Ms. Goldberg, your humor brought joy today, but allow me to share a truth. Beneath this uniform beats a heart that has mourned loss, celebrated triumphs, and endured sacrifices few can imagine. We stand not because we lack feeling, but because duty demands it." The studio fell silent. For once, Whoopi was speechless. The note continued, its words hitting harder than any punchline ever could. "Perhaps next time, instead of mocking what you don't understand, you might ask us our story." The impact of those words was immediate. Whoopi sat back in her chair, visibly moved. The audience, which moments ago had been laughing, along with her, now sat quietly, absorbing the gravity of the message. Even the usually boisterous panelists beside her seemed unsure of what to say. For Whoopi, it was a wake-up call. She realized that while her intentions had been lighthearted, her actions might have unintentionally diminished the depth of the guards' role. Their discipline wasn't just about standing still. It represented centuries of tradition, sacrifice, and service. And beneath their polished exterior lay real people with real emotions, experiences, and stories worth hearing. As the segment ended, Whoopi promised herself and her audience that she would take the lesson to heart. Humor, she reminded everyone, was a tool for connection, not division. And sometimes the best way to honor someone's humanity was to listen rather than laugh. The note from the guard lingered in Whoopi's mind long after the cameras stopped rolling. It wasn't just the words themselves that stuck with her. It was the tone, calm yet firm, respectful yet unflinching. She couldn't shake the feeling that she'd missed something important during her playful encounter earlier that day. What had seemed like harmless fun to her might have come across as dismissive or even mocking to someone else. Backstage after the show, Whoopi sat alone for a moment, replaying the events in her head. She thought about how easy it was to laugh at the guards' stoic demeanor without considering what lay beneath it. Sure, they looked rigid and robotic, but hadn't she spent years teaching people that there's always more to someone than meets the eye? That humor could open doors, but only if you used it wisely. Her phone buzzed on the table next to her, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from one of the producers. "Hey, just wanted to check in. You okay?" Whoopi smiled faintly. The team knew her well enough to sense when something was weighing on her mind. She typed back quickly, "Yeah, I'm fine, just thinking." But she wasn't fine. Not entirely. She felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her. Guilt for possibly overstepping, admiration for the guard who'd written the note, and curiosity about the person behind those powerful words. Who were they really? What kind of life did they lead under that uniform? And why had they chosen to speak up now? Determined to find answers, Whoopi reached out to the production team. "Do we know which guard sent that note?" she asked. After some quick digging, they confirmed it was one of the two guards she'd interacted with outside Buckingham Palace. With the help of the palace staff, Whoopi managed to arrange a private meeting. Not at the palace this time, but in a quieter setting where they could talk openly. When the day of the meeting arrived, Whoopi felt a strange mix of nerves and excitement. She wasn't sure what to expect. Would the guard be angry, defensive, or would they welcome the chance to share their perspective? As she walked into the small cafe where they'd agreed to meet, she spotted him immediately. He stood out not just because of his height and posture, but because of the quiet confidence he carried himself with. Whoopi approached cautiously, unsure of how to start. "Hi," she said simply, extending a hand. "I'm Whoopi." The guard shook her hand firmly, his expression softening slightly. "Thank you for coming," he replied, his voice steady and polite. There was no trace of resentment in his tone, just a calm sincerity that put Whoopi at ease. They sat down at a corner table, away from prying eyes and ears. For a few moments, neither spoke. Whoopi took a sip of her coffee, gathering her thoughts. Finally, she broke the silence. "Look," she began, leaning forward slightly. "I want to say I'm sorry. I didn't mean any harm by what I did earlier. Sometimes I forget that humor can land differently depending on who's on the receiving end." The guard nodded slowly, as if he'd expected her to say exactly that. "I understand," he said, "and I appreciate your apology, but I also wanted to share something with you, something I think is important." Whoopi listened intently as he began to speak. His words weren't defensive or accusatory. Instead, they painted a vivid picture of life as a royal guard. He talked about the grueling training process, the physical and mental toll it took, and the sacrifices required to serve in such a prestigious role. He mentioned the long hours, spent away from family, the pressure to maintain perfection in everything he did, and the emotional weight of representing centuries of tradition. "It's not just about standing still," he explained, his voice tinged with both pride and vulnerability. "It's about honoring something bigger than yourself. It's about protecting history while living in the present. And yes, sometimes it means suppressing your own emotions so others can feel safe and secure." Whoopi nodded, absorbing every word. She realized now that her jokes, though well-intentioned, had reduced the guard's role to a punchline. She hadn't taken the time to see them as individuals with dreams, fears, and struggles. Instead, she'd treated them as props in her own comedic routine. "I get it," she said softly. "And I'm really sorry if I made you or anyone else feel like I was belittling what you do. That wasn't my intention." The guard smiled faintly, the first real sign of emotion he'd shown since they sat down. "I believe you," he said. "And honestly, your humor brought a lot of joy to people that day. We're used to being seen as figures of authority or symbols of tradition, but rarely as human beings. Your visit reminded me that there's value in finding common ground, even if it starts with laughter." Whoopi felt a wave of relief wash over her. This wasn't about blame or judgment, it was about understanding. She leaned back in her chair, letting the conversation flow naturally. They talked about their lives. The guard shared stories of camaraderie among his fellow soldiers, while Whoopi opened up about her own experiences growing up in a world where laughter often served as armor against hardship. As the afternoon wore on, Whoopi found herself genuinely enjoying the exchange. Here was someone whose life was vastly different from hers, yet they connected on a deeply human level. By the end of their meeting, she felt inspired, not just to apologize, but to amplify his voice. "Would you ever consider coming on the View?" she asked suddenly. "Not as someone to joke about, but as someone to share your story. People need to hear what you've told me today. They need to understand the humanity behind the uniform." The guard hesitated for a moment, clearly surprised by the invitation. Then with a thoughtful nod, he agreed. "If it helps bridge the gap between us and the public," he said, "then I'd be honored to join you." Whoopi grinned, already imagining the impact such an appearance could have. This wasn't just about redemption. It was about creating a space for empathy and connection. For the first time since reading the note, she felt hopeful. The misunderstanding had been uncomfortable, yes, but it had also opened a door to something far greater, a chance to learn, grow, and bring people closer together. As they parted ways, Whoopi thanked the guard once again for his honesty, his patience, and his willingness to engage. Walking back to her car, she couldn't help but smile. Life had a funny way of turning moments of reflection into opportunities for change. And this, she realized, was one of those moments. The day of the View episode featuring the Royal Guard arrived, and the energy backstage was electric. Whoopi had spent the past few days preparing for this moment, knowing it was more than just another guest appearance. It was an opportunity to rewrite a narrative. The guard's willingness to step into the spotlight and share his story showed courage, and Whoopi wanted to make sure she handled it with care. As the audience filed into the studio, there was a buzz of anticipation. Word had spread about who the special guest would be, and people were curious. What would a royal guard sound like when he wasn't standing silently outside Buckingham Palace? Would he be stiff and formal, or would he reveal a side of himself that no one expected? When the cameras rolled and the show began, Whoopi opened with her usual charm. She greeted the audience warmly before diving straight into the topic. You. No, folks, she said, leaning forward in her chair. We've all seen them, the royal guards. Those tall, stoic figures standing perfectly still outside Buckingham Palace. They're iconic, right? But how much do we really know about them? The audience nodded along, intrigued. Whoopi continued, A little while ago I met one of these guards, and let me tell you, our encounter taught me something I'll never forget. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Then, turning to the side where the guest entrance was located, she gestured toward the stage. Please welcome someone very special, a member of the Royal Guard. The crowd erupted into applause as the guard walked onto the set. He moved with the same precision and poise he always did. But this time, there was a subtle difference. His expression wasn't closed off. Instead, it carried a quiet confidence, almost as if he were ready to step out from behind the uniform and speak directly to the world. Whoopi stood up to greet him, shaking his hand warmly. Thank you for being here, she said sincerely. I know this isn't easy. The guard smiled faintly, taking his seat beside her. It's not every day I get to do something like this, he admitted. But I think it's important to show people that we're human too. With that, the conversation began. Whoopi started by asking simple questions, easing him into the discussion. So, what made you decide to become a royal guard? Was it something you always dreamed of doing? He thought for a moment before answering. Not exactly, he said. I grew up in a small town, far away from anything royal. My family didn't have much, but they instilled in me the values of discipline, hard work, and service. When I joined the military, I saw it as a way to give back, to protect and honor something greater than myself. Becoming a royal guard felt like the ultimate expression of that. His voice carried a sense of pride, but also humility. It was clear that his decision hadn't been driven by ego or ambition, but by a desire to contribute to something meaningful. Whoopi listened intently, nodding along. That's beautiful, she said. But I imagine it comes with challenges. What's the hardest part of your job? The guard hesitated briefly, as if choosing his words carefully. The discipline is tough, he admitted. We train for months, sometimes years, to prepare for this role. Every movement has to be perfect. Every detail matters. And then, once you're on duty, you have to suppress your own emotions. You can't react no matter what happens around you. He went on to describe some of the stranger things tourists had done to try and get a reaction, from attempting to distract them with silly antics to outright pranks. People mean well, he added quickly. They're having fun, and honestly, sometimes it's nice to see them enjoying themselves. But for us, staying focused is non-negotiable. Whoopi nodded, recalling her own playful attempts during their first meeting. Yeah, I might have been guilty of trying to crack you guys, she joked lightly, drawing laughter from the audience. But now I understand why you stayed so composed. It's not just about following orders, it's about respecting the role you play. The guard agreed. Exactly. We represent centuries of tradition. Our job is to stand firm, not just physically, but symbolically. It's a reminder that some things endure, even when the world changes. The conversation shifted to more personal topics. Whoopi asked about the sacrifices involved in the job, and the guard opened up about the toll it took on his personal life. Being away from family is hard, he confessed. Holidays, birthdays, milestones, you miss a lot. But at the same time, you know you're doing something that matters. That helps keep you going. His honesty resonated deeply with the audience. Many nodded in understanding, their faces reflecting empathy rather than amusement. This wasn't the caricature of a royal guard they'd seen in movies or on postcards. It was a real person, sharing real struggles and triumphs. At one point, Whoopi leaned in closer, her tone softer. Do people ever underestimate you? She asked. Like, do they assume you're just Standing there without realizing everything you've gone through to earn that position? The guard chuckled, the sound surprising everyone in the room. All the time, he said. And I don't blame them. From the outside, it probably does look like we're just statues. But beneath the uniform, we're just like anyone else. We laugh, we cry, we worry about the future. The only difference is that we've chosen to dedicate ourselves to a higher purpose. By the end of the segment, the entire studio felt different. The initial curiosity had transformed into genuine respect. People weren't clapping because they'd been entertained. They were applauding because they'd learned something valuable. The guard's presence had humanized an institution that many had only seen as distant and ceremonial. As the show wrapped up, Whoopi turned to him one last time. "Is there anything else you want people to know?" she asked. "Anything you wish the world understood about what you do?" He thought for a moment, then smiled. "Just that we're proud of what we do. Proud to serve, proud to protect, and proud to carry on a legacy that means so much to so many people. And yes, we may seem serious on the outside, but inside, we're still human." The audience erupted into applause once again, this time with a warmth that filled the room. Whoopi shook the guard's hand firmly, thanking him for his candor and bravery. As he left the stage, she turned back to the camera, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes," she said, "the best lessons come from moments of misunderstanding. Today reminded me that humor is wonderful, but listening is even better. Because when we take the time to hear each other's stories, we find common ground, and that's where true connection begins." The episode ended on that note, leaving viewers with plenty to reflect on. For Whoopi, it was a reminder of why she loved her job, not just for the laughs, but for the chance to bring people together. And for the guard, it was proof that stepping outside your comfort zone could inspire change, one heartfelt conversation at a time. The ripple effects of the View episode featuring the Royal Guard began almost immediately. Social media platforms lit up with reactions, and it wasn't just fans of Whoopi chiming in. People from all walks of life were sharing their thoughts. Clips of the interview went viral, sparking conversations about duty, tradition, and the humanity behind seemingly rigid roles. The guard's calm demeanor and heartfelt words had struck a chord, reminding viewers that beneath every uniform, title, or stereotype lies a person with a story worth hearing. For Whoopi, the response was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. Messages poured in from across the globe, thanking her for creating space for such a meaningful exchange. Some praised her humility, acknowledging how rare it was for someone in her position to admit they'd misunderstood something and take steps to make amends. Others expressed gratitude for giving the guard a platform to share his perspective, noting that it challenged preconceived notions about what it means to serve. "I didn't expect this kind of reaction," Whoopi admitted during a follow-up segment on the show. "But I think it shows how hungry people are for connection. We live in a world where we're quick to label each other, whether it's based on jobs, appearances, or backgrounds. This moment reminded us that everyone has layers, and those layers deserve respect." Backstage after the episode aired, she reflected on the experience privately. It wasn't just the audience who had learned something valuable. It was her too. She realized that while humor could break barriers, empathy cemented bridges. Her playful antics outside Buckingham Palace hadn't been malicious, but they'd lacked depth. Now she understood the importance of balancing levity with listening, a lesson she vowed to carry forward in both her personal and professional life. Meanwhile, the guard returned to his duties at the palace, stepping back into the role he'd become synonymous with. But something had shifted, not just within him but among his fellow guards as well. Word spread quickly through their ranks about his appearance on The View, and many approached him to express admiration for his courage. Some confessed that they'd never imagined one of their own would step into the limelight and speak so openly about their experiences. It felt strange at first, the guard later told a colleague during a quiet moment between shifts. "I'm used to blending into the background, not standing out. But once I got past the nerves, it was freeing, like I was finally able to show people who we really are." His colleagues nodded in agreement, some admitting they'd felt similarly misunderstood over the years. One guard joked, "Maybe Next time tourists try to get us to crack, we should hand them a note like yours. We're human, folks. The camaraderie among the team grew stronger in the wake of the interview. They started talking more openly about the challenges they faced, the long hours away from loved ones, the pressure to maintain perfection, and the emotional toll of suppressing their feelings while on duty. These conversations weren't complaints. Rather, they were reminders that they weren't alone in their struggles. Sharing their stories, even if only with each other, helped lighten the burden. Outside the palace walls, public perception of the royal guards began to shift. Tourists continued to gather around the gates, snapping photos and attempting to elicit reactions. But there was a newfound sense of respect in the air. Many visitors left notes of appreciation, thanking the guards for their service. Others took the time to learn more about the history and significance of their role, gaining a deeper understanding of why they stood so still and silent. One particularly touching moment occurred when a young boy approached a guard stationed near the palace entrance. Instead of trying to make him laugh or move, the child simply handed him a drawing. In bright crayon colors, it depicted a soldier standing tall, surrounded by hearts. The guard accepted the gift graciously, his eyes softening as he examined the artwork. Though protocol prevented him from speaking, his slight nod conveyed volumes. Later, when his shift ended, he showed the picture to his teammates, who smiled knowingly. It was proof that their efforts mattered, that even in silence, they touched lives. As weeks turned into months, Whoopi kept the spirit of the conversation alive. She frequently referenced the interview on The View, using it as a springboard to discuss broader themes of empathy and understanding. During one episode, she invited a panel of experts to talk about the power of storytelling in bridging cultural divides. Another time, she highlighted everyday heroes whose work often went unnoticed: teachers, sanitation workers, caregivers, emphasizing that every job carried dignity and purpose. Her commitment to amplifying underrepresented voices inspired others to do the same. Fans of the show began sharing their own stories online, tagging Whoopi and using hashtags like "Listen to Learn" and "See the Person." What started as a single interview blossomed into a movement of sorts, encouraging people to look beyond surface-level assumptions and seek out the humanity in everyone they encountered. Even the guard found himself changed by the experience. While he remained dedicated to his duties, he also embraced opportunities to connect with the public in small but meaningful ways. On quieter days, he'd occasionally strike up brief conversations with curious tourists, answering their questions about life as a royal guard. His colleagues noticed the shift and followed suit, realizing that engaging with people didn't diminish their authority. It enhanced it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast golden light across the palace grounds, the guard stood at his post, reflecting on everything that had transpired. He thought about the note he'd written to Whoopi, the nervousness he'd felt before appearing on television, and the wave of positivity that had followed. Most of all, he thought about the countless individuals who walked past him daily, unaware of the sacrifices and stories hidden beneath his polished exterior. "Discipline doesn't silence us," he murmured to himself, echoing the words he'd shared on The View. "It gives us purpose." And perhaps that was the true takeaway, not just for him but for everyone who had witnessed the exchange. Purpose wasn't confined to grand gestures or heroic feats. It lived in the quiet moments, the unseen efforts, and the willingness to stand firm, not just physically but emotionally and morally. By choosing to step forward and share his truth, the guard had shown the world that strength and vulnerability weren't opposites. They were two sides of the same coin. Whoopi, watching clips of the ongoing impact from afar, smiled to herself. She knew the journey wasn't hers alone. It belonged to everyone who had listened, learned, and grown because of it. And as she prepared for another day of hosting, debating, and laughing with her co-hosts, she carried the memory of that meeting close to her heart. Because sometimes, the most profound connections come from the simplest acts: a note, a conversation, or a shared moment of understanding. And in a world that often feels divided, those moments matter more than ever. The ripple effects of the View episode continued to spread far beyond the studio and the palace gates. What had started as a playful encounter between Whoopi Goldberg and a royal guard had evolved into something much bigger, a lesson in empathy, understanding, and the power of storytelling that resonated with people around the world. It wasn't just about one person or one group. It was about how moments of connection could spark change on a larger scale. In the weeks following the interview, Whoopi noticed a shift, not only in herself, but also in the conversations happening both online and offline. Social media buzzed, with heartfelt posts from viewers who said they'd been inspired to look at others differently. A teacher shared how she now made an effort to learn more about her students' lives outside the classroom. A nurse talked about finding new ways to connect with patients even during the busiest shifts. Even strangers began striking up conversations in grocery stores and coffee shops, eager to hear stories they might have otherwise overlooked. "It's amazing what happens when we stop assuming and start asking," Whoopi remarked during a later episode of The View. "People are so much more than their titles or uniforms, and sometimes all it takes is one question, 'What's your story?' to remind us of that." Her words struck a chord because they were true. The guard's appearance hadn't just humanized him, it had encouraged others to see humanity in places they'd never thought to look before. Whether it was a cashier working late hours, a delivery driver braving bad weather, or a neighbor who always seemed distant, people were beginning to realize that everyone carried unseen burdens and untold triumphs. For the guard himself, life didn't change overnight, but it did become richer in unexpected ways. While he still stood tall and silent outside Buckingham Palace, he found joy in the small interactions that came his way. Tourists no longer saw him solely as part of the scenery. Instead, they approached him with curiosity and respect. Some asked polite questions about his role, while others simply thanked him for his service. Each gesture reminded him why he'd chosen this path in the first place, to inspire pride and protect tradition. But it wasn't just the public's perception that shifted. His fellow guards felt it too. Inspired by his example, many began opening up more among themselves, sharing personal stories over meals or during breaks. One guard confessed that he'd joined because he wanted to honor his grandfather, a veteran. Another admitted that being away from his kids was harder than he let on, but seeing their faces light up whenever they visited the palace made it worthwhile. These vulnerable moments created bonds stronger than any drill or ceremony ever could. Even the leadership within, the royal guard, took notice. Recognizing the positive impact of the interview, commanders started incorporating discussions about mental health and emotional well-being into training sessions. They emphasized that discipline didn't mean suppressing emotions entirely. It meant channeling them in ways that honored the mission. For the first time in years, guards were encouraged to talk openly about the challenges they faced, knowing they weren't alone. Back in New York, Whoopi reflected on how deeply the experience had affected her. She realized that comedy had always been her tool for breaking down walls, but this moment had shown her the importance of building bridges alongside those walls. Humor could disarm, yes, but listening could transform. From then on, she vowed to approach every interaction, whether on stage, in interviews, or in daily life, with a balance of wit and sincerity. Her commitment shone through in subsequent episodes of The View. Instead of focusing solely on headlines or controversies, she began dedicating segments to amplifying voices often left unheard. She invited teachers, factory workers, caregivers, and activists to share their stories, reminding audiences that heroism wasn't limited to capes or medals. Every act of kindness, resilience, or dedication mattered. One particularly memorable episode featured a panel of frontline workers discussing the toll of the pandemic. As they spoke candidly about their fears, sacrifices, and hopes for the future, tears filled the eyes of both the hosts and the audience. When it was Whoopi's turn to comment, she leaned forward, her voice steady yet tender. "You know," she said, "we spend so much time celebrating big achievements, the awards, the milestones, the victories. But real courage is showing up, day after day, even when no one's watching. That's what these folks do, that's what the Guard does, and that's what connects us all." Her words lingered in the air, leaving a lasting impression not just on the studio audience but on viewers tuning in from home. People wrote in to say they'd hugged their loved ones tighter that night, called old friends they'd lost touch with, or simply taken a moment to appreciate the quiet heroes in their own lives. Months later, the guard received a letter from a young woman who'd watched the episode. She explained that she'd been struggling with self-doubt, feeling like her efforts as a single mother went unnoticed. Hearing him speak about sacrifice and purpose had given her strength. "You reminded me that my work matters," she wrote. "Even if no one sees it, I'm making a difference. Thank you for that." When the guard read the note, he felt a lump rise in his throat. He hadn't expected his words to reach someone so personally, yet here was proof that even the smallest acts of vulnerability could create ripples of hope. That evening, as he stood at his post under the glow of the palace lights, he allowed himself a rare smile. His job hadn't changed. He was still there to serve, to protect, to represent. But his perspective had deepened. He understood now that his role wasn't just about guarding history, it was about contributing to it. As for Whoopi, she carried the lessons of that encounter with her everywhere she went. She often joked that the guard had taught her the ultimate punchline. Sometimes the best joke isn't the one that makes you laugh, it's the one that makes you think. And in this case, it had made millions rethink how they viewed each other. Years later, when asked about the most impactful moments of her career, Whoopi would always mention the Royal Guard, not because it was dramatic or groundbreaking, but because it was real. It reminded her and everyone else that behind every uniform title or stereotype lies a person with dreams, struggles, and a story worth hearing. And in a world that often feels divided, those stories are what bring us together. So whether it was a laugh shared with a co-host, a heartfelt conversation with a guest, or a quiet nod to a stranger passing by, Whoopi kept the spirit alive. Because in the end, life isn't about standing perfectly still. It's about moving forward, one meaningful connection at a time.